Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and I apologize for the lateness of this video. I have been busy dealing with a lot of random nonsense that I need to take care of around here and trying to finish some projects, and I'm also preparing for a trip here in about a month or so that's taking up a lot of time. But I finally have time to sit down and go over the roster reveal for Grand Cathay, which I am very, very excited about. And we're basically just going to kind of go through all of this together because I have heard from some people that want my thoughts on it, and it'll be fun to talk about. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing we have is, of course, a reiteration of our legendary lords, along with some gorgeous concept art of their designs, and they look absolutely fantastic. First, we have Meow Ying, the Storm Dragon. So it says that Meow Ying believes herself to be the strongest of the dragon siblings and lords her power and position of authority as protector of the Great Bastion over her brothers and sisters. Despite her earned arrogance, she is well aware of the significance of the task laid at her feet to protect Grand Cathay from the hordes of chaos to the north. The constant scheming of the mortal lords of Nangao, her capital and unconquerable home, does not make that any easier. So I imagine her campaign, you're going to have to be dealing with a lot of not super thrilled guys hanging out back at your home base. As such a powerful and ancient being, she emits an aura of command and majesty that even mighty heroes find difficult to resist. Her followers seek her favor, and her enemies fear her bite and strong magics. On the battlefield, she can channel those powers to transform between her dragon and human forms as needed. So here we pretty much have it confirmed that you will be able to turn back and forth between the human and dragon form. It's not going to be like Malice Darkblade, where you turn into the Zarkan form and then you're just stuck. You're going to be able to go back and forth, which is exciting. Both dragons are also masters of the elemental winds. This attribute, which is shared among all Grand Cathay spellcasters, increases the power of all spells cast for each spellcaster in the army. This makes taking multiple spellcasters all the more effective for the armies of Grand Cathay, even doubling or better the power of spells should you have enough. Of course, they may not have the army to back them up at that point. So that is super interesting, and I think is a feature we may see expanded to other races as they're all updated to be brought into Warhammer 3, is the idea that you want to have multiple wizards. Because right now, you're pretty much told, okay, just bring a wizard, but you only want one. Just bring one wizard. Because having multiple wizards is often pointless, with a few rare exceptions like the vampire counts. But unless you're looking to have specific spells on the battlefield, there's never really been an incentive to take multiple wizards, because why would you? So I'm really excited to see how the magic system is going to evolve. In particular with Cathay kind of seeming to lead the charge. Now, and we've known Magic is going to evolve in Game 3, that there's so many big things they're doing in Game 3, it's kind of mind-boggling, to be frank. But when I played Kislev during the media event way back after the announcement of Total War Warhammer 3, during the Kislev focus, the lore of Ice was substantially different from anything else we had in the game. And one of the things I talked about in my developer interview, which you can still find on the channel, where me and Turin were speaking with the developers, including Duck, was that Magic is receiving a pretty significant overhaul, in that there's more Winds of Magic, and the types of spells we're seeing in Total War Warhammer 3 are wildly new. They are, where you have spells like the Super Spell from the Lore of Ice that has a super long time where it's active, but while it's active, it goes through multiple phases where the spell is changing form and changing what it does. So I'm just really excited to see how these evolutions with Magic are going to work, and I really hope we get to see this tinkered around a little bit when the other races from Warhammer 1 and 2 are brought into 3 for the super map. But in any event, I'm really curious to see how the elemental wind system is going to work, in particular for what they mean as far as increasing the power of the spells cast. In that it'll be interesting to see if it's just purely stats, or if it maybe changes their appearance or effect as well. But beyond that, for Meow Ying, they also mention her specific lore is a combination of the lore of Yin and the lore of life, which is fantastic. The lore of life is, of course, a greatly desired lore by any army, as it's just very, very effective. And the lore of Yin sounds like it's going to have a lot of really interesting protection and kind of illusion type spells that are designed to debilitate enemies and protect allies. So the combination of those two really seems like Meow Ying is going to be quite a hard-hitting caster when it comes to support magics. I'm curious which spells she'll have from the lore of life to go along with her lore of Yin spells, but mixed lores are always super duper fun, and considering she's the only lore of life user in the Cathay roster, I think that's fantastic. Then we get mention of an ability, which is Disdain of Dragons, which is basically that Meow Ying is such a standoffish character that she actually has an ability in battle to represent it, because she looks down her nose at you so hard that it actually makes her harder to fight. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that actually does. Then, of course, we have Zhao Ming. The ruler of the Western provinces, the Iron Dragon is seen as a much more down-to-earth ruler and commander than his sister. Zhao Ming commands loyalty through comradeship, as well as his creation and use of powerful artifacts and magic items. He is one of the Empire's premier alchemists and welcomes the same within his realm, much to the chagrin of some of his siblings. Proximity to the Warpstone Desert and the Great Maw, still seeping with the destructive magic that created it, has led to some to believe that his mind is beginning to unravel. This would certainly explain some of the odd tendencies and decisions he makes, but it is still far from anything approaching insurrection or dangerous to Grand Cathay. While less favored than his sister by the Celestial Dragon, their mother, the Moon Empress, has a soft spot for Zhao Ming. Okay, so he's a mama's boy. Zhao Ming is the mama's boy, and Meow Ying is the daddy's girl. So we've got the two most beloved children. Both dragons lead their armies with incredible fervor, their mere presence enough to enhance their harmony and belief of their people to new heights. Non-character Cathayan units all ascribe to either Yin or Yang, and when close to the opposite receive buffs. Melee Yang units become more defensive and harder to kill, while ranged Yin units fire faster. Lords increase these benefits when they are nearby. So basically what they're telling us with that, and it sounds like a lot of fun, is that if you have a melee unit have the Yang attribute and a ranged unit which has the Yin attribute standing close enough together, they will buff one another. Where the ranged units will have a faster missile reload rate, so they'll shoot faster, and the melee units, I believe it tells us later, get higher. I think it's armor and charge resistance or something. We'll check it out later. But they get essentially tankier. And then on top of that, if you have a lord nearby, if you have notable characters nearby, you can increase what those bonuses are. So it sounds like most of the characters, it depends on the character in question, but most of the characters will not necessarily activate the Yin or Yang buff. But if they are around, should the buff be activated, then it will increase their abilities. It'll increase what the buff does, which is pretty exciting. All right, so between this and the Master of the Elemental Winds attribute, which we talked about earlier, seems to increase the power of your spells for the more Elemental Winds characters you have, it makes hero spellcasters quite a powerful choice for Cathayan armies. They are force multipliers both battlefield-wide and in their area of effect, and proper usage can see massive odds overcome. The unique abilities for the dragons, but notably Zhao Ming, are of course Dragon Transformation. Both dragons can also swap forms in the midst of battle, becoming powerful melee units with the ability to fly. I'm curious if this means the dragons will not have the ability to cast spells when they're in dragon form. I almost wonder what would be the point in not being a dragon, right? If you get stronger when you become a dragon, like you get better melee stats and you can fly, it seems like you would almost always want to be a dragon. So I'm curious what they're going to introduce to make human a tempting proposition or something you want to do sometimes, beyond just, maybe your enemy has a lot of flyers and you don't want to be up there with them or something. but I'm curious how they're gonna do that. Then, of course, for magic, Zhao Ming has spells from the lores of Yang and the lore of Metal mixed together, which Metal is also a really nice lore. It's not necessarily one of the strongest, but Final Transmutation is really solid, and it does have a lot of really useful stat spells. I mean, the what is it? Plague of Rust, the basic spell, can be really strong if you use it in the right circumstances. And then his unique ability we get told about is Warding Iron, which is that the Iron Dragon's near invulnerability can be passed onto his nearby troops for a short time. So I'm guessing he may have some kind of passive that gives him a lot of resistances to damage, and perhaps it has an active version as well, where you activate it and it becomes an aura instead of just being him. So those are our two legendary lords. So let's check out our regular lords. The first are the Dragon-Blooded Shukagon Lord, which is a badass sounding name. While relatively rare, the ancient nature of the dragon siblings means their many own progeny now exists within Grand Cathay. They often rise to positions of power, not least out of respect for their heritage, but also due to the power that comes from being a part of the family. The dragon-blooded, as they are known, are inevitably skilled combatants, natural sorcerers, and talented leaders. As you can imagine, their lineage can be a source of some jealousy and resentment from high-ranking mortals, especially when the dragon-blooded allow their abilities to develop into arrogance. As the magic wielders of Grand Cathay, the dragon-blooded fight with either the lore of Yang or the lore of Yin. Each takes its power from the Celestial Dragon Emperor and is a unique school passed down through the ages. The lore of Yang focuses on buffing allies with resolute belief or disrupting enemies with walls of wind. Particularly dire situations, it can also unleash mighty explosions upon the enemy, bringing with it the power of the Celestial Dragon Emperor himself. Their spells are the following: Jade Shield, Dragon's Breath, Wall of Wind and Fire, Stone Ground Stance, Might of Heaven and Earth, and Constellation of the Dragon. We have no idea what any of those do. You know, I look for the only I'm glad they told us the names of the spells, but I also feel like there's no point in telling us the names of the spells unless they're going to say what they do, but you know, we'll see. The lore of Yin is a more esoteric school, with the power to reflect projectiles or summon the ghosts of the dead to assist in battle. Those who practice it can shield their allies behind obfuscation and remove foes in the dead of night. Their spells are the Storm of Shadows, the Cloak of Jet, Missile Mirror, Blossom Wind, Talons of Night, and Ancestral Warriors. Okay, so we know the big spell for the lore of Yin, Ancestral Warriors, seems to very much be summoning some sort of ancestral dead ghost unit, likely to cause terror on the battlefield, and maybe they can also help in combat. And then Missile Mirror is most likely the ability we've seen shown off in the Zhao Ming trailer, Enter the World of Cathay. And we've been told via this Creative Assembly Discord that it is literally an ability where you throw up a wall, or I don't know if it's you toss it on a unit or you put it on the battlefield, but you somehow summon up this wall, and if any projectiles hit it, it not only stops the projectiles, but reflects a different projectile back at the enemy. So not only does it just flat out stop ranged attacks, but it bounces back to damage those units, which is pretty cool. I really, really love the concept. And then the mounts for that are the Warhorse or the Jade Longma, which the Jade Longmas are, of course, the dragon horses that we've seen in numerous trailers. Next are the Lord Magistrates. So we got some human lords. Be they generals or lords of one of Grand Cathay's gargantuan cities, Magistrates are some of the best the Empire has to offer. Not that Empire, this Empire. While not the greatest single combatants of their nation, they are expert commanders, inspiring and directing their troops with the skill and efficiency that comes only from years of experience in real battles. If they are engaged, they are melee warriors capable of holding their own against most enemies. In particularly large engagements, Magistrates may ride aboard a sky lantern, commanding their troops from above with a more strategic view of the battlefield. It also, as you can imagine, keeps them somewhat out of harm's way, a priority for some, if not all. Their true strength lies in their ability to bring the best of Grand Cathay to the fore, vastly increasing the bonuses received by troops working in grand harmony with one another. Or just harmony, sorry, not grand harmony. And their mount options are the Warhorse or the Sky Lantern. So first, I have to say that I really enjoy the uniqueness we're seeing of the mounts, in that, like, the Jade Longma can only be ridden by dragon-blooded sorcerers. or dragon-blooded lords, the Shukagon, while the Lord Magistrate is the only character that can ride a Sky Lantern. I really like seeing unique mounts on characters. Cough, cough, Kislev, cough, cough, Kislev. So it's really nice to see some really cool flavors and uniqueness. I also really enjoyed the Lord Magistrate so far, as that he's not some super badass melee character. He sounds very similar to the Empire General, though I imagine he's probably going to have notably more cool abilities and tools thanks to being a newer design. The Empire General is definitely one of those characters that could use a tune-up. But the Lord Magistrate has the sounds like he's much more of a support character. So if you want someone that's like in the front lines, punching people in the face and blasting magic and all that stuff, then you want to go with the Shukagon Lord. But if you're wanting someone who provides a lot of really strong buffs and seems much more dedicated to using abilities to keep your army intact and fighting at good strength, the Lord Magistrate will be a good option. I'm curious if they'll be able to pull it off. One thing that I love to see more of in Total War Warhammer is support characters, to be honest. There are a good number of them, and we've been seeing more of them in recent times, but it's like not every character needs to be a melee powerhouse or like good at killing. I would like to see more variety. Moving on. So that's it for lords. So pretty standard, 2 lords, just like we've seen with most of the other races when they come out as a base race. So for heroes, our first is the Alchemist, which I was right that the lady in the trailer is an alchemist. Turns out the lore of metal looks really different in Cathay, which makes sense. It does make sense. And I am glad that they do have more lores of magic. It's not just yin and yang the whole way down. Yin and yang are a super lore, essentially. It's like a lore of high magic, it seems, that's used only by the dragon-blooded, while mere mortals can only use the lore of heavens or the lore of metal, which is great. It adds a lot of good flair, and it helps. It's just another nice divide between, say, the Empire and Cathay. You know, Empire where all the lores of magic are practiced by the human wizards, whereas in Cathay only some are. So, for the Alchemist, the lores of Yin and Yang are not the only magics practiced in Grand Cathay, though they are the most favored. Alchemists gravitate to the Iron Dragon in the west and the city of Shenyang precisely because he is uncommonly accepting of their talents and practices. Over the years, this has grown into a powerful cabal that often sees its members hired by generals all over the Empire, as their capabilities are far beyond that of most mortals. Their potions, which if you go back and watch my analysis of the trailer, I actually do point out that if you watch the alchemist animations very closely, she actually picks up and holds a potion before she starts doing all her crazy magic stuff. Imbues them with spells from the lore of metal, as well as giving them unique buffs that can be applied to themselves or nearby units, providing massive bonuses to attack or armor. Only mount is a warhorse. So another thing that I really like is the fact that it sounds like the wizards have more abilities than just a wizard. Like, she's not just a lore of metal wizard. She also has alchemy potions that are able to buff herself or nearby units. I'm guessing one of those alchemy potions allows her to summon that crazy looking metal that she rips out of the ground to impale people in the Cathay trailer. The Astromancer. Astromancers are the accepted sorcerers of Grand Cathay, practicing the Celestial Dragon Emperor's favored lore of heavens, and harnessing it to an expert level thanks to the natural affinity between their leader and the Azir Wind. After more than 5,000 years of perfecting the art, they are quite adept, and only more so when riding to battle aboard the Whooshing War Compass, which we will talk about later. So and their mount is a warhorse or a Whooshing War Compass, which I love this. To me, this is literally the Empire. This is almost like something the Empire would do. No, it is something the Empire would do. Except for in the Empire, their Astromancers ride Celestial Hurricanums, which is one of the only units we're missing from the Empire roster. Alright, so that's it for characters. On to units. So they don't... The interesting thing is they don't have any melee heroes. So there's no, like, non-magic melee hero. They are all wizards. Which, considering that Cathay seems to have that whole system of the Elemental Winds ability to buff your wizards for having lots of wizards, it makes sense. On to units. So first, we've got Peasant Long Spearmen. The backbone of Grand Cathay is its people, and they are numerous beyond count. While the Celestial Dragon Emperor is wise and his children are benevolent leaders to the people under their command, they understand with the detachment of immortality that one thing they will always have is more bodies. More men and women to man the battlements, more fighters to hold the line, more defenders to make the forces arrayed against them fight for every inch. Thus, the least trained armies of Grand Cathay are still a power to be reckoned with through sheer force of numbers. Unlike the hired soldiers or lower classes of other factions, the warriors of wind and field, as they are known, meaning it's a very nice way to say peasant, feel a fierce loyalty to their cause and the dragons that watch over them. They may buckle and even break, but they know their role. Notable characteristics. Like all melee units, the Peasant Long Spearmen are Yang aligned, increasing their leadership and melee defense. Okay, so Yin units shoot faster, Yang units get a bonus to leadership and melee defense when in close proximity. Their long spears give them fantastic charge defense when bracing, making them a suitable anti-cavalry and anti-large force. As noted, the endless ranks of Grand Cathay are expendable and expected to flee from battle when facing more than they can handle. Finishing the fight is more the work of more disciplined troops. Jade Warriors. The Jade Warriors are Grand Cathay's line troops. They are the standing army, expertly trained and well equipped to defend from ogres, rebels, chaos, or anything else that might come wandering in from the west and north. Each city maintains its own regiment of Jade Warriors, and few make their home outside of one of the metropolises that dot the landscape of Grand Cathay. In times of war, they will head to battle armed in numerous possible ways, collectively known as the Warriors of Jade and Steel. The ranged firepower of Grand Cathay is what breaks the army, but the Jade Warriors, so named for the Celestial Dragon Emperor's sacred stone, must hold the line and cut down enemies who think them weak. Variants are Sword and Shield and Halberd. Notable characteristics. Long trained to defend Grand Cathay against the relentless assaults from beyond the Grand Bastion, Jade Warriors adopt a defensive stance when immobile, making them harder to charge and kill. This builds as they remain that way, taking the lay of the land and bedding in to fend off the next attack, further increasing their charge resistance and armor. That is very cool. So it sounds like the stances are coming back in Total War Warhammer 3. We've had things that are like vaguely similar to stances. Obviously, we have the Lance formation for Bretonnian Knights, but it's really exciting to see Cathay bringing out defensive stance as like a concept. I'm really curious if this is going to be a Cathay only thing, or if we might see this spreading around to other factions. You know, very few armies in the Warhammer world are noted for being very well regimented and trained, because it's usually just humans, because frankly humans are the only race that tend to rely so heavily upon using specific stances in order to help deal with the either superior numbers or superior strength or superior whatever that non-human armies tend to bring against them. I would love to see the Empire get some sort of stance system, or at the very least have a callback to there was a tabletop rule. I'm struggling to remember the name of it. I think it started with an A. It wasn't alignments. It was I forget what it's called. Auxiliaries. There's an auxiliary rule in tabletop that's really big for Empire players, and the auxiliary rule was basically the system of that whenever you bought a unit, you could buy another unit to be their auxiliary, so that unit worked hand in hand with that unit and provided various buffs. You know, I'd love to see them do more with like the relationship between Kroxigors and Skinks in the Lizardman roster. They're supposed to have like a whole network, to the extent that those two work together so well that if you play tabletop, one of your core units was that you could take a Skink cohort and upgrade them to have Kroxigors as part of their formation, which, to represent that, I would just love for Skinks to have a rule with Kroxigors, which I think there actually is a rule for it, called Spawnkin. Yes, there is a rule for it. And Spawnkin basically just allows them to interact better. So I would love to see Skinks like maybe get a leadership and melee defense buff when they're nearby Kroxigors or something, just to add more flavor. But anyway, enough about them. Let's move on. While the halberd-wielding variant is unable to block missile fire due to the lack of shields, it is no less adept at betting in to take a charge head-on and destroy any force foolish enough to challenge them. For the Jade Warriors. And we're gonna talk about some things involving the roster, because there are some things that come to mind when talking about the Cathay roster that we'll discuss at the end. The last regular melee unit, so pretty very to the point roster in a lot of ways. So we've got the Celestial Dragon Guard. Grand Cathay's elite soldiers are officially the Legion of the Dragon Emperor, his loyal defenders. As the Eastern Empire has expanded, more and more Dragon Guard have been added to the Celestial Host, which now numbers enough that they can be dispatched to battlefields all over the East. Their arrival represents an exponential increase in power for the army, not least for the morale boost it gives the soldiers to see such a direct connection to their emperor. I'm guessing that means that they will provide they will have the I forget what it's called, but there's a passive you can put on units in Total War Warhammer where they provide like a small leadership buff to nearby units, and a whole bunch of units have it. So I'm expecting these guys will have that. Notable characteristics: wielding halberd, so they only come in halberd form. They are natural opponents to the armored and the massive, as capable of spearing a beast from the Chaos Waste as a man from his horse. However, as the most well-trained units in Grand Cathay, they are capable of defending against charges from anything, be it Chaos Warrior or Skaven Slave. Okay, so they have charge defense against all, instead of just charge defense against large, which I imagine will be the case for the Jade Warriors with halberds. And they are superior to their brothers in the Jade Warriors in every way but one. There are, simply, less Celestial Dragon Guard out there. So they will have less guys in their units, and will more than likely be obviously they'll be more expensive, but also sounds like they'll have less people per unit. And then we're on to missile infantry. Peasant archers. Archery is considered a noble and useful pastime in Grand Cathay, and young girls are especially encouraged to follow the path of the Moon Empress into ranged combat. Thus, even the lowest in society will have a well-maintained bow within their household, and be more than capable of drawing it to defend their home. Naturally, however, they are not particularly well equipped, and are more deterrent than professionals. Notable characteristics: as with any ranged unit among Cathayan armies, peasant archers are yin aligned, receiving bonuses when close to yang units, being that they shoot faster. Also expendable, though slightly less expected to be in the thick of things as an archer. If you got them in combat, you done goofed. However, despite their mighty number and decent training, the gear of the peasantry is simply unlikely to cause much damage to heavily armored foes. So they're going to have virtually no armor piercing. There will be a lot of them. And it sounds like they may have like okay stats as far as maybe when it comes to like melee attack and melee defense. But just like the peasant long spearmen, I imagine they're going to break very easily when going up against anything that offers stern resistance or an aggressive attack. Also, so Yang in this Cathayan ideology represents masculinity, and Yin represents femininity. So I am honestly thinking that we're probably going to see a thing with Cathay where I'm curious. It seems like all of the melee units are going to be men, and all of the lady units that are not Jade Warriors or Dragon Guard are going to be the ladies. I'm curious if that will be true or not, but we'll have to see. Next up is the Iron Hail Gunners. The closest we can get to an old world shotgun. The Iron Hail gun is a short-range blunderbuss that can rip through almost anything if positioned correctly. The gunners themselves are lightly armored, making them vulnerable if surprised, and quite the glass cannon of a unit. However, should they bring their guns to bear for even a moment, never mind a sustained period, it spells doom for even the heaviest warriors. Notable characteristics: the strength of gunpowder gives these units a heavy armor-piercing punch when they line up a shot. Their range is much shorter than either archers or crossbowmen elsewhere in the army. However, this can be quite the advantage when used to keep them in a useful position for harmony and still pumping out heavy damage. Now, despite the fact they're talked about as if they're wielding shotguns, so you may think, oh, they're using like like hail and shot ammunition. These appear to be the ladies we see in the original Cathay trailer who have the rocket launchers. So when The Iron Hail Gunners seem to be the ladies with the shoulder mounted big booms, because looking through the rest of the trailer, everything else is crossbows or long guns. So it's weird to me that they call them shotguns. I'm guessing they only call them that because they're short range. So they hit with a big punch and they're fairly short range, which we do see in the trailer that they pretty much walk out right in front of the Tzeentch army to shoot. So these are the shoulder-mounted rockets, even though they're short enough range that they refer to them more as shotguns, which is weird. Crane gunners. The mighty crane gun requires 2 people to lift, set up, and fire. One is positioned at the trigger, ready to sight and shoot anything in a massive range. The other carries the tower shield on which the gun rests, steadying the shooter as well as providing built-in cover. It is a specialist device for the highly trained, but it can be devastatingly effective when properly employed. Range and precision are nothing to scoff at, especially if they're pointed at your head. Notable characteristics: save the artillery. This will outrange anything on the battlefield, acting as effective snipers. So, they're Jezzails, obviously. Their armor-piercing rounds and heavy shields make them a unique and difficult unit for enemies to deal with, especially if unprepared. 2 people for the price of 1, bargain. I don't know why this is a note they included. But yeah, they're Jezzails. So I would assume that they're Jezzails with probably higher level equipment. In that Jezzails being Skaven. I bet Skaven Jezzails have more guys in a unit, but I bet these ladies have a superior stat line, would be my guess. To make kind of compare and contrast. Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. Crossbowmen are the ranged backbone of the Grand Cathay army, assigned to Jade Warriors and Dragon Guard who show an aptitude for shooting rather than stabbing. While Grand Cathay brings powerful magics and giant machinery to war, it is less ever present in their armies than other factions. Sorcerers are an important precious resource, while the construction required for a lantern or war compass may be beyond the poorer cities. So these are kind of your meat and potatoes ranged units. The crossbow is as close to an industrialized production as the handcrafted weapons in the Grand Cathay can get, though there will still be subtle differences between the direction of one master artificer and another. This makes the Jade Warriors equipped with crossbows a mainstay of city defense, entrusted to outrange their opponents and defeat them before they get within striking distance. The variants for the Jade Warrior are crossbow and crossbow with shield. Notable characteristics: while their armor weighs them down slightly, they will defeat a peasant archer in all other areas. So they're not as fast, but they have longer range, they hit harder, they're better in melee, yada yada. That increased armor, especially when further improved with a shield, makes them difficult for other ranged units to trade with effectively. And then while not a melee troop, they will happily survive and even defeat lesser foes in the midst of a close range engagement. So they're not true hybrid, but it sounds like they're kind of in that sphere. Almost like you'd see with most Marauder, Norskin Marauder infantry with shooting weapons, with their javelins and throwing axes and stuff. So if they got attacked by, say, Chaos Warhounds, especially with their really high armor, they would almost assuredly win that fight. But if they're being attacked by something like a core unit from another faction like Saurus Warriors, they'll probably lose for sure. Celestial Dragon Crossbowmen. When the Celestial Host, the combined name for the various sections of the Dragon Guard, makes war, it does so in style and with power. The Dragon Crossbows are repeating powerhouses, with armor-piercing bolts to rip through almost anything and fierce training to keep up the fire. Shielded with the best armor in Grand Cathay, very little can stand up to a hail of bolts from these troops. Notable characteristics: while Crane Gunners will outrange and outdamage them, the Celestial Dragon Guard are hardier and more powerful in all forms of warfare. They are shielded, and the shields keep them protected, while the power of the crossbows makes their bolts armor-piercing. And while not a true hybrid, they are more than capable of holding their own in battle. So these guys, even if you got on them with a pretty decent core melee unit, like Saurus Warriors or Chaos Warriors, I'm actually thinking these guys might be able to well hold their own. I don't think they necessarily win the fight, but they would at least be able to last for a long time and allow reinforcements to come save them. I'm also curious, when it says that they're repeating powerhouses, I wonder if this means they're literally shooting repeater crossbows, because that would be a significant increase in power over the Jade Warriors crossbowmen, where not only do they have armor-piercing bolts, but they also would be firing notably more shots per volley. Could be very, very interesting to see. Grand Cathay Cavalry and Chariots. Peasant Horsemen. As they are everywhere in the world, the horse is the most common steed and beast of burden in Grand Cathay. Plenty of the peasantry learn to ride as part of their duties, and carrying goods or information across the great distances of the nation is tantamount to its survival. Thus, when called to war, many can mount up and act as scouts or harrying attackers for larger armies. Notable characteristics. This is the fastest Cathayan unit that cannot fly, so it seems the fastest unit is immediately afterwards. Can deploy ahead of the main army to scout, and they have the Vanguard keyword. And like foot melee units, cavalry belong to the Yang harmony. So it doesn't make any mention of them having ranged attacks. So something that's actually super interesting about Cathay is Cathay does not have any ranged cavalry. If they're on horseback, all of their fast-moving units do not seem to have any range capabilities whatsoever. All of the Cathayan ranged units seem very slow and plodding, which is very interesting. Very interesting. Next up are the Jade Lancers, which are a cavalry unit. Put a Jade Warrior with all their training, all their armor, and all their power on a horse, and this is what you get. Grand Cathay's mainstay cavalry is a hard-hitting, well-armored force. Often the Jade Lancers are part of scouting groups that head beyond the Great Bastion to break up and destroy chaos tribes in the region before they can gather their power and be a threat. Doing so is as dangerous as it is necessary. Notable characteristics. They are slower but heavier than standard horsemen. Jade Lancers will deal extreme damage to infantry formations they crash into, which frankly sounds like they'll be needed, because if there's one thing Cathay seems to be rather lacking on a lot of their units, it's effective ways to deal with heavy infantry. So sounds like these guys, I'm curious if they'll have an actual anti-infantry bonus, or if this is basically just saying that because they're so heavy, due to their mass and the sheer amount of armor they have, if they're just good for dealing with infantry. They're also granted the defense, heavily armored with shields to protect themselves further, so they're going to be tanky sons of guns. And conforming to Grand Cathay's defensive nature, they are far hardier than other factions' cavalry of a similar sort. So these guys will probably be substantially, or at least notably tankier than even Empire Knights, but it sounds like they're going to be slower, and it also sounds like they're going to be sacrificing any special gimmicks. So I'm personally doubting they're going to have the anti-infantry bonus. So they're going to be, say, a lot heavier than Empire Knights, who are probably going to be cheaper, however. And also Empire Knights are probably easier to maneuver. And they're also going to be substantially heavier than anything Bretonia's fielding knight-wise, except for maybe Grail Guardians. But pretty much every decent knight unit in Bretonia comes with frickin' anti-large. So. And then the last one is the Great Longma Riders. Dragon-blooded. So these are not actually Shukagon. They are Shukagon, I guess, but these guys are not sorcerers. These are dragon-blooded who are yet to rise to their own prominence, or just simply prefer a place within the celestial host for the honor it brings. They often become Great Longma Riders. Flying to battle alongside other elements of the celestial host, they are the solution to endless problems on the battlefield, from enemy flyers to the hardiest of ground troops. Notable characteristics. While Grand Cathay is often focused on dealing damage from afar, anything in the way of the Great Longma Riders is unlikely to survive for long. Their speed, the power of their charge, and the strength of their armor is unmatched. Such is the strength of the Longma charge that enemies have been known to flee in fear before they are even beaten. So I'm assuming the flee in fear comment means that the Great Longma Riders either cause fear, or they cause fear only when they're on the charge. But considering that the beasts they're riding on look pretty scary, I mean, a dragon-blooded steed, it's literally a dragon in the shape of a horse. And they look like they'd probably really hurt to get run over by, and are pretty nasty. I wonder if, I assume they have fangs rather than regular teeth, horse teeth, but it's going to be interesting to see what they look like stat-wise. And I'm really curious how they're going to line up against the likes of the Royal Pegasus Riders, because I think they're going to be substantially more powerful than regular Pegasus Knights for Bretonia, but I'm curious how they'll stack up against the likes of Griffins or the Hippogriff Riders or the Royal Pegasus Knights. It'll be interesting to see. Grand Cathay constructs. So the first is the Terracotta Sentinel, who we have seen quite a bit of. Grand Cathay's ancient protectors, the Terracotta Sentinels, are remnants of an era long past when the Celestial Dragon Emperor was an active leader in the nation's armies. Tales of their creation range from the believable to the legendary, that each was a personally blessed soldier of the Dragon Emperor and a great army to fend off chaos in its earliest years, meaning they were dealing with demons, and endless demons at that, much worse than the usual cattle that comes out of the north. True or not, they stand sentinel all over Cathay, often sentinel and still for centuries, overlooking paddy fields or partially submerged in rivers, or even as stanchions in the Great Bastion itself. But the light within will burn, and the statue will finally move if summoned to a nearby threat. One thing I'm curious about with these guys is I'm wondering if it's implying that new ones cannot be made. So maybe the Celestial Dragon Emperor made all the ones he could during that early war, and when you recruit them, you're just activating them, or if you're actually able to make new ones or not. That'd be something interesting to hear about. Notable characteristics: the ultimate in Cathayan defense of their settlements and armies, laying waste to anything unlucky enough to make contact with it. Truly alien to most of the armies of the world, and either impossibly massive or an ancient enemy. It causes deep terror in the hearts of any who are raised against it. Great, so they cause terror. And as happy destroying steam tanks and city gates as it is laying waste to enemy armies. So presumably they're going to have tons of armor piercing, and of course you can throw them against into sieges to smash your way through gates. Next up are the flying war machines. So first we have the Sky Lantern. Sky Lanterns serve dual purpose on the battlefield. They are often crewed by magistrates or other commanders that can oversee and direct the troops below, using a complex system of fans and smoke. However, they are also crewed by 4 crane gunners, sitting in an armored carriage held aloft by the balloon, itself in place thanks to an ever-burning vermilion warbird. It is generally agreed that they have a lot more fun than their landlocked cousins. Notable characteristics: while glacially slow to move around the battlefield, it provides a much-needed vantage point for troops below, allowing them to spot enemies hiding in foliage and giving them a morale boost. So it sounds like this thing, when flying around, can provide a leadership buff, the Encourage Aura, that's what it's called. So they'll probably have something like the Encourage Aura to buff nearby units, as well as having an increased ability to spot enemies. So perhaps they will be super useful for not only having a larger spot range, but a more accurate one, so they can detect, you know, various hidden units. And if you're fighting Clan Eshin, they all use their smoke bombs, perhaps they'll be able to detect them faster than they normally would. And of course they have crane gunners on, who are able to just snipe people constantly, which is excellent, and it's probably very, very difficult to avoid their harassment, very similar to gyrocopters or skink chiefs on pterodons. And then as flying units armed with gunners, both this and the Sky Junk are yen aligned, which makes sense. Speaking of the Sky Junk, it is quite large. The Sky Junk is more warship than a simple battlefield unit. Its humongous size supports great guns that project shrapnel at oncoming hordes, wiping out whole battalions. Within the armored carrier beneath the main balloon are a host of bombs ready to be dropped on those below. During times of great danger, fleets of Sky Junks are seen floating from the Great Bastion, moving steadily towards the latest threat and fully intending to wipe it out. Notable characteristics: a larger and more deadly Sky Lantern, packed with soldiers that spew rain rockets at enemies. So of course we know that it's got the front-mounted rocket launcher, which is lovely. Can drop makeshift bombs from above on unsuspecting foes, dealing massive damage. So it can drop bombs. Slow and near useless once out of ammunition, the Sky Junk is nevertheless an incredibly valuable addition to the battlefield if used right. So it sounds like it actually is pretty easy to use them wrong. And it almost sounds like it's, when it comes to melee stuff, I would assume these things are even worse than their dwarven kin, the gyrocopter and the gyro bomber. I imagine they're going to be absolutely miserable in combat scenarios. So the Sky Lantern at least has some non-combat usefulness in that it provides leadership buffs, and it allows you to like spot enemies. And you can also put a general in it so he can provide, I'm assuming, more or powerful buffs over a larger radius. So this thing is actually useful even once it's out of ammunition. Whereas the Sky Hulk or Sky Junk sounds like it is almost entirely reliant on its ammunition, and once it's out of ammo, it is totally useless and doesn't do anything. All right, then we are on to artillery and war machines. The first is the Grand Cannon. Oxen carry the artillery of Grand Cathay to war, pulling these guns to battle from the city walls and Great Bastion they usually inhabit. More suited to firing from on high, these cannons will still rip apart anything they gain sighting on, but benefit greatly from smartly used terrain. So, don't put anything in front of them, and please put them on a hill. Shaped like dragons and belching flaming projectiles, they are not a subtle representation of Grand Cathay's power. Notable characteristics. While being Grand Cathay's most basic form of artillery, they still pack a huge punch, more than capable of toppling monsters or city walls. So these are your big regular cannons, solid armor piercing, probably an anti-large bonus, etc. The flaming armor piercing projectiles will make short work of smaller foes placed in their path. Great, so they shoot big kabooms. And the oxen pulling it are pretty cute all told, and make it and other Cathayan artillery more mobile than counterparts from other factions. Okay, so that's cool. So their war machines are actually actively pulled by beasts of burden rather than being deployed to the battlefield and then only humans are staying on it. So it sounds like they'll actually be pretty good at being redeployed, which will be nice considering it sounds like that they're probably going to be difficult to get line of sight on in some circumstances. The Whooshing War Compass. Perhaps the oddest part of Grand Cathay's armory to an outsider, this miniaturized version of the Great Compass engraved into the floor of the Celestial Court high above Wei Jin is a powerful tool for manipulation of the elemental winds. Imbued with the power of the heavens and intricately designed as a weapon of war, meteors and lightning storms are summoned in its wake. While expensive to build and maintain, they are a truly unique weapon. This sounds exactly like a Celestial Hurricanum. Exactly like a Celestial Hurricanum. I think the only thing this thing does that the Celestial Hurricanum of the Empire does not do is that I think it's bigger and pulled by 4 horses instead of 2 or 1. Or it's 2 on the Celestial Hurricanum, and it also sounds like it regains power. So it kind of is like an engine of the gods in that sense, where it actually buffs your regeneration of Winds of Magic. Pretty sure the Engine of the Gods does that. Anyway, notable characteristics: a mounted spellcaster with access to unique long-range spells that deal extreme damage to enemy formations. So I'm guessing, I'm curious if it's gonna have a regular, the wizard on it has actual spells and he casts using the Winds of Magic, or if it is a character who instead has a shooting system with ammo, like the Luminarch of Hysh, which uses ammunition even though it's technically a magical attack, or if he's going to have bound spells like the Engine of the Gods does. From the way they worded it, it sounds like he's going to have actual spells rather than bound spells, but we'll have to see. More than capable of tearing up the ground and crashing headlong into enemy forces, making it a Yang-aligned unit, but one with significant range prowess. And then, of course, that it regains its own power with increased speed thanks to its control over the elemental winds. And then last, we're at the end here. The last unit is the Fire Rain Rocket. The ultimate in range firepower for the armies of Grand Cathay, these rocket launchers spray the battlefield with deadly explosive projectiles. Vital for pitched battles as well as taking or defending settlements, their rockets are equally effective against almost all targets, and the arc of their fire easily penetrates enemy walls. While the impact is widespread at long range, this is only more effective against massed legions of enemies. Notable characteristics: has an inferior range, but greatly improved firepower over the Grand Cannon. There we go. Left to its own devices and placed near a melee unit to increase reload speed through yin harmony, Fire Rain rockets will happily wipe out whole formations. And then both Cathayan artillery pieces have a higher than usual number of support staff on hand, making them that much harder to wipe out if caught in close combat. So if you're trying to use Warhounds or light cavalry or something to take these guys offline, kill them so they stop firing, it sounds like it's actually going to be a little more difficult than regular units or regular siege weapons for other armies because they have more guys helping work them. So overall, the roster does look really good. There are a number of things missing, so definitely a lot of open territory for DLCs for Cathay. You know, obviously we've heard whispers or mention of a Monkey King and whatever nonsense he might bring. There's no martial arts type thing going on. There doesn't seem to be any notable melee hero that's designed to just get up in melee and mess people up and just keep fighting. There's actually substantially less mythical things than I was expecting. I was actually expecting a number of more monsters, or not necessarily monsters, but like monstrous infantry or monstrous cavalry. They're actually the roster is extremely human focused. Obviously, there is some fantastical stuff with the Great Longma Riders, the Terracotta Sentinel being your representation of the Terracotta Army, and then your legendary lords are dragons, but they don't have any basic dragons. All of their dragons are like superpowers. So they're the funny thing with Cathay is I honestly think most people would agree, I think, with me that maybe I was expecting them to feel much more like a human version of elves, and in reality they feel much more like a human version of dwarfs, where the army almost entirely seems very defensively focused. Lots of heavy infantry, lots of slow moving. Everything in the army seems to move very slow. Like their war machines move faster than most other armies, but that's probably not saying a lot. I doubt they're super fast because no doubt the people walking alongside the war machines and firing them are not going to be mounted on oxen. They're going to be walking, so they're probably not going to be that much faster. I mean, even the things they have that they share in common with the dwarves, their stuff seems slower. Like, dwarves have gyrocopters and gyro bombers. But Cathay has sky lanterns and sky junks, which the Cathayan version seems substantially slower. I mean, gyrocopters and gyro bombers can hustle. They can move pretty quick. Whereas it seems like the Cathayan version cannot move fast at all, and is going to be much more reliant on super long range shooting with their Giselle type units on both versions. Or, the long range rockets on the sky junk at least, and then the sky lantern having the crane guns. But I'm very, very curious to see what the army is going to feel like playability wise. I wonder if this will be the fabled dwarfs with cavalry that so many people not familiar with Warhammer wanted to see. But they're definitely lacking. There are definitely things the dwarfs bring to the party that the Cathay does not. One of the things that's interesting to me about Cathay is that it seems like they are severely lacking damage in melee. Like, they have a lot of things that can hold the line between between pretty much all of their non-basic infantry or their non-peasant tier infantry being extremely heavily armored. They have a defensive stance system, so they get even more melee defense, or they get even more armor and charge resistance the longer they stay in place. They get leadership and melee defense bonuses if they're sitting on top, if they're boxed on top of a ranged unit. Like, Cathay seems like they're designed to be boxed. If you're someone that really likes to stack your army together and you like to make a box, then sounds like Cathay's going to be the army for you. with your box being augmented by Terracotta Sentinels and Sky Lanterns. But they do, of course, have a very interesting system in that their magic is limited. They don't have all 8 winds like the Empire are all 9 wins like the High Elves. They only have 4. And they can only have 3 on a battlefield at once, because since the Shukagon is a lord, and of course the legendary lords, you can't have multiple users of Yin or Yang on the battlefield. You can either have a Yang wizard, or you can have a Yin wizard, or you can have one of the legendary lords, unless of course you're, you have reinforcements. Whereas the basic wizards will bring metal and heavens into the fray. So I'm curious how they're going to incentivize stacking wizards when for hero version you only have 2 other options. So really, really curious to see where this is going to go. I think the roster is a really solid start. It feels like a human faction. That is something that I think they did a really good job of. Is that I know I did not agree with this at all, and I think the people that were saying this were being, quite frankly, idiotic. But I know many people were like, "Oh, Cathay's gonna be a Mary Sue faction that has like just all the craziest shit," but it's fairly tame, to be frank. I almost would say that Kislev had more fantastical things showing up on the battlefield than Cathay does. But I mean, Cathay does have a lot of fantasticalness packed into their legendary lords. But the overall roster is very, very human-centric, which is good. I think that's genuinely a good thing. They feel like the Empire, if the Empire had less focus on technology, in exchange for having some monsters. Because the Empire and Grand Cathay are very, very interesting when placed against each other. Which I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out. But that's it for my roster review. I think the Cathay roster is looking fantastic. It has like a good, solid roster that has notable styles that it encourages, and it is lacking some interesting tools. Like the fact that Cathay does not have a single ranged cavalry unit is very surprising. Like, I'm curious if the Peasant Horsemen do have bows and they just forgot to mention it. But we'll have to wait and see. Because if they don't have any form of ranged cav, that's actually going to be a pretty interesting debilitation to their roster. Is that, okay, if you want to have mobile shooting attacks, you have to take Sky Lanterns or Sky Junks. But it sounds like unless you're taking one of the legendary lords, or you're investing heavily in great Longma riders, you're going to have a hard time defending these things because they're so damn slow, and I imagine they are absolute garbage in melee. There is no mention of these units having any good melee defense. Like, they're armored, cool, but it sounds like they're going to be significantly slower than the Dwarf Gyrocopters, and Dwarf Gyrocopters get easily bullied by other flying units. So, like, I feel like these things, you're just not going to be able to take them against a lot of armies that can, field cheap or powerful flyers, unless you're, like, you would either have to take Miao Ying or Zhao Ming so they can be up in the air fighting, as well as Longma riders, or great Longma riders to help defend. So, really curious to see how this is all going to play out. I think the roster is really great, and I'm really excited to check out more. And that's all I have to say on the subject. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. It was super long, but I just kind of wanted to talk through everything because it's just a fun thing to talk about. And it is a super exciting thing to finally be getting some like really good concrete information about the faction. Hopefully they'll have some interesting footage for us next week. So I will see, or this upcoming week, most likely on Tuesday and Friday. Tuesday and Friday seem to be the big days these time right now. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you around. Thanks. Bye.